Right now, one patch of the Pacific Ocean is warming up, and that same patch of warm water is about to help decide the price of your morning coffee, whether harvests fail on 3 separate continents, and which cities spend the winter underwater. This is a Super El Niño, and this year's could be one of the strongest ever recorded, with ocean temperatures forecast to climb more than 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. You won't see it happen. There are no clouds to point at, no single storm on the evening news. Just a quiet warming, far out at sea, that reorganizes the weather of billions of people over the year that follows. In our previous chapter, we broke down what a Super El Niño actually is, and how a shift in one ocean can hijack the weather of the entire planet. That was the science. This is the part that lands closer to home, because El Niño does not spread its damage evenly. It picks winners and losers, country by country, and the map of who suffers is stranger and far more unfair than you would ever guess. And it reaches beyond any single country. A Super El Niño releases so much stored ocean heat into the sky that it can shove the entire planet's temperature to a new record high, on top of a world that is already the warmest it has ever been. This is a local ocean event with a global fever. Some nations are about to drown. Others will crack and burn under a drought that refuses to break. A few will barely feel a thing, and 1 or 2 might even come out ahead. The real question is not whether the Super El Niño will change the world. It's where the blow lands hardest, who pays the price, and whether anyone is ready. So let's follow the damage and see where it lands. Start with the engine quickly, because everything downstream depends on it. Normally steady winds along the equator act like a hand holding a mound of warm water pinned against the western side of the Pacific over near Indonesia. Think of a bathtub tilted so all the warm water gathers at one end. During El Niño, that hand simply lets go. The winds fade, the water sloshes back east toward the Americas, and a vast pool of tropical heat ends up sitting in the wrong place. From that one displacement, the world splits in two. One half of the tropics is handed far too much rain. The other half is robbed of it. A planet-sized seesaw with the Pacific as its pivot. That is where the trouble begins, because the ocean never keeps its heat to itself. All that warmth pours up into the sky and drags the planet's rain clouds along with it. The great towers of tropical rainfall, which normally sit over Southeast Asia, pack up and slide thousands of miles east out over the open Pacific. And this year, the board is tilted further than usual. The Pacific was already running feverishly warm before the tipping began, so this El Niño is stacking its heat on top of an ocean primed to overreact. A bigger opening shove means the dominoes fall harder and faster than they would in a gentle year. And this is the idea that powers everything that follows. Move the rain and you don't just change the weather in one spot. You start a chain reaction. Line up a row of dominoes stretching all the way around the globe. The first one tips over in the middle of the Pacific, knocks into the next and the next, until the fall reaches countries that never feel a single drop of El Niño's rain directly. Scientists call these long-distance links teleconnections. You could just call it the domino effect. One ocean tipping the whole board, and the first domino falls right where El Niño is born. That warm water reaches the coast of Peru and Ecuador first, and it lands on one of the richest fishing grounds on Earth. Normally, cold water wells up here from the deep, loaded with nutrients, feeding titanic schools of anchovy. Peru pulls more of these little fish from the sea than almost anyone alive, and grinds most of them into fish meal, the protein that feeds farmed fish, chickens, and pigs across the world. The warm phase shuts it all down. The warm surface water seals the cold beneath it like a lid on a pot. The nutrients stop rising, and the anchovy vanish, diving deep or dying off. The catch collapses, and because Peru supplies so much of the world's fish meal, one bad season on a single stretch of coast quietly lifts the cost of raising livestock on the far side of the planet. The price of your chicken can shift because of fish you'll never see, off a shore you'll never visit. Peru knows this cycle intimately. A powerful coastal El Niño can inflict billions of dollars in damage on one country, tearing out the roads and ports its economy depends on, and the rebuilding can drag on for years before the next event arrives. On land, that same warm ocean does the opposite of drought. It loads the air with moisture and brings it out. Northern Peru and Ecuador, usually bone dry, can face weeks of torrential rain, the kind that turns streets into rivers and hillsides into landslides. In past strong events, entire regions have been cut off, roads and bridges swept away, crops drowned where they stood. When food cannot reach the cities, the price of basics spikes overnight and shelves empty in a wave of panic buying. There is a second, quieter blow hidden in all that water. Ecuador is the largest banana exporter on the planet, and the same floods that drowned its roads rot the fruit on the plantations and spread crop disease between them. Standing water also breeds mosquitoes and sickness, so on top of the ruined harvest comes a surge of outbreaks. The bunch of bananas in your cart can carry the fingerprint of a flood you never heard about. Further south, the story flips once more, and here El Niño can actually help. Argentina's farmland often gets a generous soaking, and its enormous soybean harvest can swell. A rare piece of good news and a clue to the larger pattern. El Niño is not a catastrophe everywhere. It works as a great redistribution, stealing rain from the places that need it and dumping it on the places that don't. Cross to the far side of the Pacific and you reach the half of the world El Niño leaves gasping for rain. This is where the drought lives, and where the dominoes fall fastest and hit hardest. Keep in mind that this is the mirror image of South America. Where Peru drowns, these lands crack and dry. The same ocean, the same event, opposite disasters, split only by where along the Pacific a country happens to sit. Begin with Indonesia. As the rain clouds march east, the islands dry out, and the real danger is what comes next. Indonesia sits on vast peatlands, ancient carbon-rich soil that, once it dries, burns like a buried fuse. Fires erupt across Sumatra and Borneo, and the smoke climbs into a thick brown haze that drifts across the region, grounding flights, closing schools, and choking millions of people in neighboring countries. Worse still, Indonesia and Malaysia together grow most of the world's palm oil, an ingredient hidden inside roughly half the products on any supermarket shelf. Drought starves that harvest, and the cost creeps upward on everything from instant noodles to soap. The damage runs deeper than food. Indonesia is also the world's top source of nickel, the metal that hardens steel and powers electric car batteries, and its mines and smelters lean heavily on hydroelectric power. Drain the rivers and that supply stutters, sending ripples into the price of everything from kitchen cutlery to the battery in your next car. Next door lies Vietnam, the beating heart of the world's Robusta coffee, the beans behind most instant coffee and espresso blends on Earth. A severe El Niño can carve away as much as a fifth of its harvest, and the world tastes it in the cup. Vietnam leans hard on hydroelectric dams too, so when the rivers fall low, the power runs short, and rolling blackouts shut down factories. It's the same grim recipe across the region. Thailand's sugar and rice shrivel. The Philippines watches its corn fail. And when frightened exporters halt rice shipments to protect their own citizens, the price of the single most important food for billions of people can leap. Add it all up, and one dry season across Southeast Asia can nudge the cost of your coffee, your cooking oil, and your bowl of rice at the same time. 3 separate shocks arriving from the same patch of missing rain. Then comes India, where El Niño tends to smother the monsoon, the season of rains that farmers there call the real finance minister of the nation. A weak monsoon means failing crops, rising food prices, and the kind of inflation that topples governments. And far to the south, Australia braces for its most dangerous months. It dries the continent out and cranks up the heat, priming the land for ferocious bushfires, while its wheat harvest shrinks and helps drive up the global price of bread. Now to North America, where El Niño plays its strangest trick of all, a paradox that catches the same country coming and going. For the southern United States and California, a strong El Niño usually means one thing above everything else: rain, enormous amounts of it. And it's not only California. From Texas across the Gulf to Florida, the southern storm track wakes up, and a stretch of country used to mild, quiet winters can suddenly face round after round of heavy rain, flooding, and severe weather it's not built to shrug off. You might think that's good news, especially for a California ground down by years of drought, and in part it is. Reservoirs refill, the mountains bank deep snow, and the worst of the dry years finally eases. But the rain does not come gently. It arrives as atmospheric rivers, colossal fire hoses of moisture aimed straight at the coast, dropping months of water in a matter of days. Ground that spent years baking hard cannot drink it in fast enough. Rivers jump their banks, streets vanish underwater, and on hillsides stripped bare by old wildfires, the downpour peels the earth away in deadly mudslides. The very storms that end the drought can bury whole neighborhoods in mud. That's the cruel paradox. The same water is both the cure and the catastrophe, and which one a town gets often comes down to infrastructure built for a drier, calmer world. Dams, storm drains, and slopes designed for yesterday's climate collide with the rainfall of a supercharged ocean, and the repair bill climbs into the billions. There is one quiet piece of relief buried in all of this. The same El Niño that floods the West tends to strangle hurricanes in the Atlantic, ripping the storms apart before they can threaten the Gulf and the East Coast. It's a rare gift and a fragile one, easily canceled out by an ocean running warmer every year. Even El Niño's mercies arrive with an asterisk. Travel north and the picture flips. The northern states and much of Canada tend to get a milder, drier winter, the deep cold bottled up somewhere else, the usual snow strangely missing. One country split clean down the middle, one half braced against the flood, and the other quietly wondering where winter went. Before we reach the stretch of the map where you might actually live, one uncomfortable truth is worth pausing on. Look back over the wreckage so far and a pattern surfaces. The places struck hardest, the burning forests, the failed harvests, are very often the countries with the least money to shield themselves. El Niño is a natural event, but the suffering it hands out is shaped by something entirely human. Who can afford to get ready? Nowhere makes that clearer than Southern Africa. Here, El Niño tends to slam the door on the rains, and the drought that follows is merciless. Across countries like Zambia and Zimbabwe, the maize that feeds whole populations shrivel in the fields. And the crisis doubles because much of the region leans on one enormous source of electricity, a giant dam on the Zambezi River. When the rains fail, the reservoir behind it drops, the turbines slow, and entire nations fall into rolling blackouts that can swallow most of the day. Failed crops and failed power at once, both from the same missing rain. The human toll of that pairing is staggering. In past strong El Niño years, drought across southern Africa has pushed tens of millions of people toward hunger at once, emptying grain stores and driving families off land that could no longer feed them. This is where El Niño stops being a line on a chart and becomes a question of survival. Yet even Africa refuses to be simple. Swing toward the east, toward the Horn, and El Niño often does the reverse, unleashing heavy rains where drought usually rules. Sometimes that shatters a deadly dry spell and rescues the harvest. Other times it triggers flash floods, spreads waterborne disease, and stirs up plagues of locusts that breed in the sudden green. Rescue and ruin poured from the very same change in the sky. El Niño even rearranges disease. The floods it brings breed the mosquitoes that carry dengue and malaria, and the droughts it causes foul the water that spreads cholera. Season after season, outbreaks have tracked the ocean's shifting mood across the tropics. The warm water does not only move the rain, it carries sickness along too. And Europe? Here's where we reach the far frayed end of the domino chain. Europe sits a long way from the Pacific, and by the time El Niño's influence crawls that far, it's faint, tangled, and hard to pin down. Scientists pick out only gentle tendencies, a slightly raised chance of certain weather patterns, a small nudge to the winds that steer Atlantic storms. Nothing like the brutal clarity of a Peruvian flood or an Indonesian fire. It's a good reminder that El Niño's grip loosens with distance. The closer a place sits to that patch of Pacific heat, the harder it gets squeezed. And this is where every one of those far-off disasters quietly arrives at your door. You might live thousands of miles from any El Niño flood or fire and still end up paying for it in the one place the whole world meets, the supermarket. Follow the Dominoes to the end of the line and they all topple onto the same shelf. Coffee nudged higher by a scorched harvest in Vietnam. Chocolate as drought stresses the cocoa farms of West Africa. Rice, bread, sugar, cooking oil, each one lifted by a failed season somewhere along the chain. No one price doubles overnight in a way you would notice. Instead, a dozen ordinary things drift upward together. A quiet tax El Niño collects from almost everyone, whether or not they ever learn its name. The disaster is loudest at the coastlines. The bill, though, is global, and it is paid at the checkout. So step back from the map, and a larger picture snaps into focus. The Super El Niño is not really a weather event at all. It's a global stress test. In the span of a few months, it probes every weak point we have: our food supply, our power grids, our rivers and coastlines and roads, and it finds every crack at the same time. And the pressure does not fall fairly. The wealthiest nations mostly face a heavy repair bill. The poorest face something closer to catastrophe: hunger, displacement, and disease from an event they did nothing to set in motion. That gap, more than any storm, is what turns a natural cycle into a human crisis. The good news, and there is some, is that we are no longer caught blind. We can watch these events building months in advance, and that lead time is a gift if we choose to use it. Time for a government to hold grain back in a reserve, to manage water before the drought bites, to stage the aid and map the evacuation routes before the flood ever arrives. The nations that treat El Niño as a forecast to act on rather than a headline to panic over are the ones that come through it with the fewest scars. For the rest of us, the power is smaller, but real. Knowing why food prices are drifting upward, why a distant country is burning, why a familiar season has gone strange, turns a bewildering year into a readable one. Understanding the pattern is its own quiet form of preparation. Because in the end, El Niño does not care about borders or economies or who deserves what. It simply shifts heat and water around a single connected planet and lets the consequences land where they fall. Watching it sweep the globe is a strange lesson in how tightly everything we depend on is stitched together. How one warm patch of sea can reach into a kitchen, a power grid, a harvest, half a world away. And in a warming world, these events are only growing fiercer. This will not be the last one. Think of it as a rehearsal. If you want the full story of how this Super El Niño formed and the science of what it's doing to the planet as a whole, start with our first video on what the Super El Niño will do to Earth. Watch that one next.